Good evening, folks. This is PW Coach and Women in Science again. As promised, we are going to talk about French secularism.
So, maybe as a start, could you give us an introduction to what actually is French secularism?
Sure, French secularism is actually very specific to France. So, before I'm trying to explain, and before we are trying to understand what is French secularism, I would like to just remind what is secularism in general. So, secularism is in fact the full separation between the state and the religious. So, basically, the state is neutral toward religious matter, and in fact, it is supporting nor religion nor irreligion, right? So that is secularism in general.
Right.
So when it comes to French secularism, it's important to understand that it's a little bit more than just the simple definition of secularism as I just mentioned it. So French secularism has a very long history in France. The, the, um, the common name of French secularism today is what we call the laïcité, and is actually the first constitutional principle of secularism. So I'm going to read you actually exactly the first article of the Constitution, that is, France is an indivisible, secular, democratic, and social republic, guaranteeing that all citizens, regardless of their origin, race, or religion, are treated as equal before the law and respecting all religious beliefs. So that is what stated in the Constitution in 1958, and it is the first article. And as you could hear from what I've just read, French secularism is a little bit broader than just the separation between the state and the religion. It's actually a very inclusive principle. It is actually protecting minorities and protecting religion itself. So that is a very important point. Furthermore, French secularism has a very long history in France. It actually started in the French Revolution in 1789. And before that, there was a monarchy with full divine right. So, as you can imagine, just after the revolution, and all the revolutionaries people rejected completely the Catholic Church. And it was a very, very hard time for the church, and the priests had to leave, had to hide. They were persecuted and persecuted, and it was a really difficult time. It's only in 1801 that Napoleon Bonaparte signed, together with the Pope Pius VII, what we call the Concordat, and that in fact brought back a little bit of peace and with the Catholic Church, right? So that concordat was there to establish rule between the state and the church, and to re-establish some relationship between the state and the church. And at that moment, the state would nominate the bishop and the archbishops, and the pope will canonize them.
Right. So in fact, the, the religious powers were subjugated to the state. The state governed, if you'd like, the church.
Absolutely. However, it was the first time since the revolution that Napoleon Bonaparte recognized that the Catholicism was the religion of the majority of the French citizen. And that was written in the Concordat.
Okay.
This Concordat later on, at the end of the century, extended to the Judaism and to the Protestantism. But at the time, it was, when it was signed, it was regarding the Catholic Church.
Right. Okay. And so after the Concordat, what happened?
There is another very important, actually crucial date, that was the separation between the state and the school, and actually a separation between the school and the church. The school became mandatory and secular, and that's the law of Jules Ferry in 1881, I believe.
Right. So that's quite a little bit later.
It's quite later, and it's a really it's kind of a threshold and a very important date, because as you may imagine, the school is really an easy way of bringing religiosity into a society.
Right.
And eventually, all that led in 1905 to the famous law of separation between the church, the religion, and the state. And this is basically, it took about a century to fully achieve separation and neutrality of the state with the religion.
Right. And then being completed in 1958 by this first article of the Constitution, as you just read it.
Absolutely. And that article as was gave in a way the and is still today defining finally the French laïcité, the French secularism, and that is really specific to France.
Right. S- uh, Could you perhaps give us a bit, a short comparison with some of the other countries in the Western world, perhaps with the UK or the US?
Yes, sure. You know, the specificity in France is that there is a really a full separation between the state and the religious. And actually, it's important to realize that in Western democracies such as the UK, for instance, um, which are secular democracies as well, we still have religion still have quite an importance, I would say. And you would imagine, because in the UK, for instance, the Queen is the garant of the Anglican Church, and she's actually the head of church.
Hmm.
So it's, there is still quite an influence of the
So
religion.
the head of state is also the head of the
Ab-
Anglican Church.
Absolutely.
Right. Okay.
Now, if you take the example of the US, I would tell you, for instance, that in the fourth article of the Constitution, there are a lot of references to the Lord. You know, the motto of the country itself is "In God We Trust," as written in the dollar bill. So it's a little bit more subtle, but religion has still quite an importance there.
Right. Okay. Uh, and so maybe back then to the laïcité, so the secularism in France. What you just read to us in the first article of the Constitution is very interesting indeed, and seems quite the contrary of what you hear on TV and what you're perhaps led to believe that constitutes laïcité in France.
Absolutely. And that is really another debate, but it's a very important discussion. And you touch upon a very important point here, is that currently in France, there is a very heated debate about secularism. And why is that? Well, simply because, uh, France has changed face, right? And it's not the same as it used to be in 1958 nor in 1905. And all that because of its colonial past, and we observe a new France, if I may say, a modern France that is not only rooted in Judeo-Christianity, but that finds also some that is a bit more diverse, and that have as well a Muslim as a French, quite some Muslim as French citizen. That is counting quite some Muslim as French citizen.
Right, because so France counts around 60 million inhabitants, and 8 million of those are Muslims. Is that
Yes, more or
about
less
correct?
7 to 8 million. Yeah, indeed, and therefore it's a non-negligible part of the French society, and therefore there are actually some French people, a group of French people, that would like to make us believe that laïcité or secularism in France is to prohibit the practice of religion.
Hmm.
It's to prohibit the practice of religion in a public space, and to prohibit maybe eventually, for some even, the practice of religion. And this is absolutely the contrary of what the first article of the Constitution um, is about.
Hmm. That is indeed